All right, and welcome back to Think Like a Leader. Thank you for joining us today, Melissa. I'm so
Oh,
glad this is finally happening.
me too. It's my pleasure. Like I was saying before we started, back when we met, which feels like about 100 million years ago, I knew that we were going to have a great conversation. So I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I know. We connected on Podmatch, and this conversation was originally scheduled way earlier. And then, as you know, we just discussed life took a turn for me in the best way. My wife became pregnant, with our second child. So that's an uh, awesome experience. But I had to press pause on a lot of different things just to kind of rehash a little bit what was going on. But you've been gracious, you've been patient this whole time, and it's been great because not only was I able to do what I needed to do, but I could do a little bit more homework on you, right? Listen to some of the podcasts you've done, listen to the TED Talks, the other keynotes you've given that are on YouTube. Me and my wife actually watched your TEDx talk together, so it was awesome. And for the listeners, it's called Five Steps to Start Being Kinder to Yourself. It's on TED. It's relatable, it's funny, but it has a lot of practicality into it. So it's very, very relatable. And we're going to jump into that later in this conversation. Just a brief introduction to you, and it's Dr. Melissa Robinson Winemiller. I want to make sure I say the whole name so people don't get it confused. All right. She teaches empathy and leadership, but not in the typical what you hear, the soft and the fluffy kind of way, right? She ties empathy to productivity, she ties it to innovation, and she even ties it to profit. And she frames it as a real skill set, no matter even if you're in especially in today's environment, to be honest, because we have AI, we got big tech, and it's just literally changing everything that we do today. And the one part that makes this personal is your perspective comes from a very personal turning point in your life where you've actually had an unempathetic leader, and unempathetic leadership force you to walk away from something that you were doing for such a long time. So when you as a when we're listening to Dr. Melissa, I want us to really like understand she speaks about empathy not like from this trendy place. She speaks about it from a place of like, these are lessons that she's paid in real life. And so I really want to have that on our forefront of mind as we listen to her today, because I'm excited to have this conversation. I know I've been ready for it, but Dr. Melissa, welcome to Think Like a Leader. I appreciate you.
Well, I couldn't be happier to be here, Dorian. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we hop into the heavy stuff, I just want to ask, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I mean, things are going so well. I'm so happy with the TEDx. We hit over 100,000 views a couple weeks ago, and the right? Yes, because the thing is
Yes.
that means people are finding value in it. People are listening because there's something there they need to hear, and that's the part that makes me happy. I mean, I wanna change the world, so,
I love that.
you
I
know?
love that. I love that. So you kind of alluded to it, but I want to add like, for the people that don't know who you are, they're meeting you for the first time in this conversation. What do you do? And what problem are you most committed to solving right now?
So, specifically, I talk about empathy and also emotional intelligence within leadership circles. Because we are at a huge pivotal time right now for organizations as a whole, corporations, more specifically. And we need to really learn how to lean into these human attributes. And empathy is about as human as it gets. I mean, people think it's feeling, but it's not. It's perspective taking. It's understanding the perspective of the other person, which when you think about it, if you're dealing in business, should be your goal anyway, whether it's with your customer or with your people or your board of directors or whoever. So the problem that I'm seeing more and more, and there is a quickening to this, is that the more we add in things into these organizations that can't take perspective and don't have these humanistic qualities like AI, like big tech, like big data, the more we need to be able to lean into things like empathy. And the leaders that can are going to be the ones that are supercharged to take control of the future. It's just supply and demand. The more supply we have of AI and things that don't have these human attributes, the more the demand will be for people who can actually actionably use them strategically as a skill, not just as like this fluffy concept, but as a strategic targeted skill.
I love that. I love that. And we're going to dive a lot more into the different types of empathy and how it applies to leadership a little later on in the conversation, because I think that's going to be really important for our listeners to truly understand what it is. Because I think you made a good point. The typical mind of thinking of empathy is weakness or softness, or it's especially as a male, right? You hear the word empathy and you think you soft, right? That's the typical line of thinking. So we're going to dive more into that, and I'm excited to learn more from you on that. But I want you to take us back to the moment that your career shifted. Right, like I said, we touched on it earlier. Unempathetic leadership kind of pushed you out of the career that you were currently in. What happened? What happened?
So let me back it up just a little bit before then, because I was a musician and I played French horn. I got to travel and do stuff. I got to play with people like Ray Charles and Mannheim Steamroller. And I mean, it was awesome. And it's all I'd ever wanted to do. I'd started playing music and playing piano when I was like 6 years old. So this was my life. But music is not always very stable as a performer. So I went back and got my first doctorate and went to teach at this institution, at this university. I mean, as a French horn professor. And, as you know, if you stop and you think, well, how many French horn professors have I known? Most people are like, is that a thing? I didn't know those even existed, you know? So I went and I kind of left everything behind. I went to the other side of the country to do this. And within my first term, I was assaulted by one of my colleagues, and that was bad. I mean, it was bad enough, but the problem is that after that, the leadership didn't care. They didn't wanna know. They were more interested in the status quo. When I went to the guy that was our boss, I was told as junior faculty if I was stirring up trouble, I might as well kiss promotion goodbye, which I didn't care about promotion. I just wanted to be able to go to work safe.
Wow.
When I went to the person above him, I was told if I didn't like it, I could leave. Well, there's not a lot of French horn professorships. Where was I gonna go? Plus, I had spent everything I had to be able to get there and get into that job. Academia, it doesn't make you rich. You are there because you wanna do it. And this continued for 6 more years until I finally had to leave it altogether and ended up having to leave music altogether. COVID happened not too long after that, and that was the end of that. But all the way along, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened, because I tried to talk to HR, I tried to talk to the ombuds, I tried to talk to anybody who would listen to me, within the university with this idea I wanted to still be able to keep my music job. But, like, nobody, even people that were good people that wanted to help, that wanted to understand, were so bound by the system. The system was so toxic and so messed up because of the leadership that they couldn't do it. They didn't wanna hear it, they didn't wanna know, this couldn't be happening, whatever. And so that really stuck with me because it was like, what was the problem? It's like there was no humanity. It isn't that they were bad people, but they just didn't wanna know. And that's when I started trying to put my thumb on what I thought maybe was missing. Went back to get the second doctorate and an MBA and some other stuff to back that up. By then I was doing consulting in, healthcare with my husband, so, I was putting these different bona fides in place, and I just kept coming back to this empathy thing, that there seemed to be something either in the understanding of it or the application of it, or, it didn't seem to be a skill. It was just like this fluffy thing. It wasn't, something you could learn and teach and employ. And so that's where I got into my second doctorate, which is in interdisciplinary leadership. And I'm working on my dissertation right now, which is on empathy and leadership, because I believe that strongly, that it's that important, that I'm willing to dedicate that kind of time and effort to it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that story because I think it highlights a lot of different things, and empathy is something that, as we alluded to a little earlier, it just has this bad taste in it's specifically Western society.
Mhm.
And that's the only society that I know is Western society.
Yeah.
And that word is just, you get this bad taste in your mouth. Like, what exactly is empathy? Um, and I want to touch on something because you had a moment in your TED talk that made me and my wife laugh out loud. And it was, I'm sure you probably know what I'm already going to refer to is the the night that you described that you, as the young kids say, crashed out on your husband. you know,
Yeah.
you came he came home wanting to talk, wanting to, have a conversation with his wife, and you laid it into him, and the reason, as you stated, still unknown. You really didn't even know, right? You teach empathy for a living now. So in that moment, what did that moment expose about the standards that you were holding yourself to, and how did that change for you?
That I was definitely holding myself to standards that I could never meet, that we are all humans and that something like empathy is a day by day by day practice. It's not a performance, it's a practice. You do it every day and you do the best you can. And the backside of that as well is that I was really missing the self empathy piece. You know, I was out there talking about it and trying to help other people learn empathy and person to person empathy, but I wasn't giving it to myself. You know, by holding myself to a standard that I couldn't meet, I was just setting myself up for imposter syndrome, is what I was doing. And I think a lot of us do that.
Yeah. No, 100%. And, normally I talk about standards of just like having a way of living, right? What was that way of living that you were, you know, I would say like you couldn't meet, right? Like what was that expectation that you were setting for yourself that was, you know, way, way far from what it should be?
I think it was that teacher expectation that if
Mm,
I'm and this goes to leaders as well. I mean, teachers and leaders are they're synonymous. That if I'm gonna teach it, then I better have this perfect. If I'm gonna be the one out here talking about it, then I have to be the paragon of whatever it is. And, newsflash, I'm a human being. That's not gonna happen. But a lot of leaders do fall into that. I have to be strong. I can't show weakness. I have to be perfect. I can't make mistakes. And it's like, as long as you live on planet Earth and you're a member of the human race, that's just not going to happen. So empathy
yeah.
starts at home.
I love that. I love that because I think a lot of people, as they grow into leadership, understand that and learn that you can't, there is no such thing as perfection,
Yeah.
right? It's a word, sure, but to reach it as a human being is not part of our DNA. It is what it is. And I love that you said empathy is practice because it makes it something that you have to put daily attention to every single day. And I think that is a huge takeaway because a lot of times people think you either just have it or you don't.
Right.
And I think that's like a myth, especially when it comes to, something like empathy, but in a lot of things, right? Like even in leadership, you could be a great leader at work, but you coaching your son on his hockey team, you you may have a whole different demeanor, right? And it's not to say you're a bad leader. It's just it takes practice sometimes in different arenas as well, and I've been learning this over time throughout my journey, walking into leadership. Um, and I want you to talk a little bit about in those moments. So, what was your self talk there? When you made that realization of saying, "Man, I am just a human being." How did you walk yourself down from, and I'm gonna say it this way for lack of a better term, from that teacher pedestal, right? Like I have to have it perfect to owning the self-talk of I'm a human being and I'm gonna get better at this every single day.
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about a lot with empathy is that empathy and judgment cannot exist in the same space. They can't. If you're going to be judgmental about somebody else, you can't give them empathy because the point of empathy is to be able to have their perspective through their eyes. If you're judging them and you're passing judgment, you're looking at their situation through your own eyes. So empathy and judgment just can't be in the same room. And I had to actually flip that script and understand that what I was doing was being incredibly harsh and judgmental on myself. I was judging what I was doing as being subpar, as not hitting a certain mark. So I had to back up and say, okay, if you were going to look at this situation without putting judgment on it, without putting emotional value on it, it's what I call being critical, not caring. You're critiquing, you're looking for better ways, you're trying to decide how to do it better,
Hmm.
but you're not assigning emotional value to it as much as you can. I mean, again, we're all humans. And once I could start kind of backing it up and thinking about it in terms of that and teasing out the judgment that was happening, then I was able to say, okay, if I were, looking at this in terms of somebody else, I would never hold them to this standard. And it all crept in subconsciously. It's not like I was one day like, I'm going to hold myself to this perfection and that's it. It's those things that just kind of creep in around the corners and you don't realize they're there until you're in a trap.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. That critical not caring piece is something that, I think I needed to hear today, just for myself, but our listeners probably needed to hear it as well, because it is very easy to be critical over yourself, right? Like right now, if you saw like my area, like I hate having stuff everywhere, right? That's why I have a background going. But if like, I'm very critical over. I'm like, you're dirty. I'm being critical over it. When in reality, it's like I've just haven't had the necessary allocated time to do the thing,
Right.
right? And it's
Yeah.
okay, dude. Like, you're okay. Like, yeah, there's a few water bottles. At least you know you're hydrated, like stuff like that, like stuff like that. It literally before our conversation, I was being so critical of the space that I'm currently in. Like, this is disgusting. Like, if someone, like it was that way, but I think this is a heck of a reframe for me of just understanding, like, man, it's okay, you know,
Well,
it's
and do you
okay.
hear that jump to judgment that you just made? Because
Yeah.
you went from, okay, I've got too many water bottles here, and that makes me disgusting.
Yeah.
It's okay. You have a few extra water bottles. Just take the judgment off the end of it, but you can't get rid of it until you realize it's there. The thing about judgment is it usually does come in with an and like that. My
Hmm.
kitchen floor is dirty and that makes me lazy. No, your kitchen floor is dirty. That's it. There's no judgment. No emotional value. There's nothing else to assign to that. It's a state. It's not an emotion.
Wow. Yeah, that was a powerful reframe for me just in that moment. That was a powerful reframe. Um, I wanna touch on, you've broken empathy up into 3 different kinds. You have emotional, you have cognitive, and then we touched on a little bit about self-empathy. For our listeners, what's the difference and why does that distinction matter for leaders or entrepreneurs, founders, things of that nature? Why does that matter?
Yeah, because it does actually. It matters hugely. The interesting thing about empathy is there's actually 43 different definitions. This yeah, this has been going on for a long time, and people still argue about it. So the 3 that I've teased out that go along it's called a dual root model of empathy. I won't bore you with the details, but cognitive and emotional empathy are 2 really different things with how we experience them and how we use them. So if you think emotional empathy, that is the quick, I feel what you feel. It's usually fast, it's instinctive. There's probably some biological basis because it's part of how we survive as a species. If we want to be able to live in a society, there has to be a certain amount of that. Cognitive empathy is that I logically understand what you're feeling. I just don't feel it. It's usually a little slower. It's iterative. You'll go over it more than one time. And it's the kind of empathy leaders really need because that gut feeling empathy is just going to lead to burnout and empathy fatigue. You can't feel for everybody. That's the one where we get like Elon Musk talking about suicidal empathy and toxic empathy and some of these things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I can see how they made the leap. It's cognitive empathy that we really need to pay attention to. It's logical, it's iterative, and it's what allows you to understand the perspective of the other person. Because if you can name their outcome, what their hopes and their fears are, what it is that they're either trying to strive for or to avoid, now you can understand what they want. which means that you can align their outcome with your outcome, which
Hmm.
means now everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction.
Wow, love that. That's man, I've never put a word to that before. It there's because there's a lot of moments where, and I've seen leaders do this where they're like, "Oh no, I definitely understand what you're saying," and then they'll map out everything you've just said, and then still say, "Well, does that align with what we're trying to do?" And it like completely like rips the emotion out of it, and like you're in a meeting and you think, "Oh my god, this guy's heartless," but in reality, he's fully understanding what's going on. It's just how does this align with what we're trying to do? You know, that's game for anyone listening. That is game right there. Because you said most leaders want to have this or should have this, the cognitive empathy.
Yes, and they shouldn't be afraid to use it. I mean, because you say empathy, and it's just like you said, people think soft, they think weak, they think
Yeah.
puppies and rainbows, but cognitive empathy, there's nothing soft or weak about it. It's strategic, it's targeted, and, you are using it to align outcomes to make things better for everybody. So,
But how does a leader get better at it? How does a leader go from, maybe they are the emotional empathic, right? And they feel and they want to move into more cognitive space. How do they make that transition? Because I'm sure it's not easy.
actually, the 2 work together. When you're really doing it right, the 2 work together.
Okay.
So, it's actually a pretty short step. If you're already feeling like you're putting in too much emotion and too much heart, that's when you get to burnout. It's when you get to empathy fatigue. And more often than not, you don't see the situation clearly because you're thinking with too much heart and not enough head, right? You got to be able to keep a cool head and a warm heart. That's how you're able to balance these two. So the first thing you do is, you're whether you're picking a person or a group or a team, you say to yourself, okay, I need to be able to name their outcome. What is their outcome? What is the outcome they're either afraid of or they're moving towards? And how does that align or not align with my outcome? What is my outcome with this project? You know? So that now, like I said, you're both moving in the same direction, but it just starts with those 3 simple words. Name their outcome. And the first time people do it, sometimes they're like, "Well, I have no idea what they want." To which my response is usually, "Well, have you asked them? Have you talked to them? Is it possible they might just tell you?" Sit down and have a conversation and try to lead more with the head instead of the heart.
It really is that simple just to ask them too. That's something I've noticed too. It's just ask. You'll get you'll get the answer you're looking for. Um, Now you also made a clean distinction. When I was listening to your talks, it was about empathy and compassion. And you said empathy is what you feel, but compassion is what you do. Break that down for us. What does that look like in leadership? And I want to bring it to like specifically like under pressure situations or the leader that just wants to fix everything, right? The fixer. You have there's plenty of fixers out there. So talk to that person there and try to get them to just talk to that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to start with empathy. Empathy and compassion get balled up in this thing, but they're really 2 very different, distinct things. Empathy is what you feel or what you think or understanding that other person's outcome. Compassion is what you do with that. That's the active part. So think of it like, you have I mean, this is the age-old cliche, right? You've got a couple and one person just wants to be heard and the other person want go ahead, say it with me, wants to fix it.
Yep.
Right?
Hey, look, I don't want
Right.
look, my wife's not listening, so that's a that's a whole different conversation, but
But
it's the truth, yeah,
yeah.
it's
The person that wants to be heard, they want empathy. They want to be understood. They want to have that other person say, "Yeah, I hear your perspective. I understand it." The person that wants to fix it wants to jump right in on compassion. But as we can see from that situation, if you jump in on compassion before you have empathy, you may be trying to give the wrong thing. And then you end up with compassion that doesn't work. The 2 have to go together.
yeah. That's why, when I was telling you earlier that, when I watched it with my your talk with my wife, it was very impactful because we got to hear those things in real time, and we just looked at each other like, we both gotta work on these types of things, like, and it's just like you said, it's a practice, right? It's not something that you'll just be, right? You don't be empathetic, you practice empathy, like, and I think that was the an awesome reframe for us, because we needed it, and I think for anyone listening, like, it's okay, but practice it. Definitely practice it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, see, and that makes me happy because that's what I want. I wanna make the world better one heart at a time, so, that's my
yeah,
goal.
that's what we're yeah, that's why we're in it.
Yeah.
But I wanna take a turn and kinda go into another framework that she kinda threw out there, and it was the shame spiral.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure there's listeners out there that have definitely felt it. I felt it. I'm sure you felt it. Where and I'm gonna run through what you said. You said it was expectation, comparison, judgment, shame, numbing. I know this podcast is about leaders, but I want to just talk to the person out there right now. Where do you see that spiral happening most, in the workforce, in work right now?
You do really see it in leadership, unfortunately, and it's because these are people that are very driven, they're very ambitious, they're very smart, they've worked very hard to get to where they're at, but they may not be the best leaders. They might be the best technicians, they might bring in the biggest contracts, they might have the most clients, but no one has actually trained them in leadership, which is not their fault necessarily. They've been failed by their organizations, but they get into these positions and they know they're not the best leaders. And so they start judging themselves. Now we're dealing with imposter syndrome. Now we're dealing with, this feeling of I have to appear strong because I really know I'm not and I can't let them know it. And now you're starting to lead into these numbing activities, whether it's alcohol or addictions or food or sometimes overwork. I mean, they'll throw themselves right back into the work until they burn themselves out. And leadership has like a 35% burnout rate, which is a lot. No human capital should be forced to just run until they fall, but that's what's happening. So you can see this behavior a lot in leadership.
This may be I don't know if I know the answer to this, but it's like, how are businesses combating this? Like, because they're putting these individuals in leadership, but then they're seeing burnout at around 35%, right? So have you seen trends that, these companies, these businesses are doing to alleviate that? And if so, like, what are those things that they're doing or implementing to help their leaders?
I haven't really, because I don't think they quite have a handle on what's causing it. I mean, the thing is, and there can be a lot of things at play. As human beings, we tend to be pretty complex that way, and that it's never one thing that causes something. It's usually a combination of a bunch of things. But in my opinion, it really needs to start with that self empathy and the non judgmental piece and giving them permission to be human, to make mistakes, to say, this just didn't work out the way I wanted to, but let's go back and take a look at it again and see if we can fix it. Getting away from a blame culture, now we have to point fingers and somebody has to pay for this kind of thing. Because if you're in a leadership position and you make a mistake and you know that if you admit you made this mistake, you may be dealing with lawsuits, you may be dealing with risk and compliance, you could be dealing with all sorts of other problems, then of course you're not going to be very willing to step up and say, look, this was a mistake, but we can fix it and we can make it even better. You're going to want to circle the wagons, which means I am strong, I am not weak, and I do not admit fault. And yet you're still dealing with that internal judgment. So it doesn't get fixed. We're in the spiral.
Yeah, that's a heck of an insight. It's a heck of an insight. I think that's the self is so important. Like, it really is. Like, that's the only thing you can really control.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that you can really control. I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing that. Um, let's dive into the 5 R's. You have a 5 R's framework: recognize, redefine, replace, reinforce, revise. Walk us through each step, um, and kind of give us an idea of how we can apply it to like the workplace, and the way of the world today. Yep.
Okay. So we're talking about the 5 R's and within the TEDx how that applied. The first R is to recognize, because if you can't recognize the problem, then you can't fix the problem. And like in my case, I was doing all sorts of numbing behaviors to try and cover up what the actual problem was. I had to recognize that what I was doing was taking responsibility for somebody else's bad behavior. And until I could recognize that, it wasn't going to get any better. The second thing I had to do is redefine my actions. So once I recognized that what I was doing was covering up for somebody else's bad actions, I could redefine it as what it was. I was judging myself because of what someone else had done, and that judgment could go. But until I could redefine it, I was still working off the wrong definition. It's just like how with empathy, we work off the wrong definition of it's all feeling. So
Hmm.
people don't understand what it is. Well, until I could redefine what was happening with me to say what was actually happening, I couldn't address it because I didn't really know what it was. The third thing is to replace. So now we're talking about habits because you can't break a habit, or at least that's what I learned as a musician. You don't break a habit, you replace it. So instead of doing the things that I had been doing, the food and the alcohol and the things that were not good, to just try and numb myself out, I started trying to replace those with habits that were actually going to be healthy. So that every time that thought was like, "Oh, maybe you should go check out a bag of Cheetos," it was like, "No, I'm gonna go for a 10-minute walk. No, I'm gonna go listen to some music. No, I'm gonna do something else." Because as you do that, the old habits remind you to kick into the new habits, and you can start to replace them a little bit at a time. The third thing you do with habits is to reinforce them. Right? So every time you're doing something well, every time you feel things are going well, then you can kick in and be like, "Okay, you did good. There's no judgment on this, and you're doing what you need to do to be a healthier human being." So, you know, it's okay for you to take 5 minutes for yourself. It's okay if you wanna go paint your nails. Whatever that means to you, because it's different for everybody, but you have to reinforce that behavior. And then the final R is to revise. And the purpose of that is that as human beings, we grow. So your habits should grow with you. So should your goals. So should the direction that you want to go. So the habits that suited you yesterday may not be the same ones that are going to suit you tomorrow. So you have to continually revise those habits to be able to help you grow into version 2.0 or 3.0 or wherever you want to go. And that causes you to actually do the self-reflection and think about, well, who do I want to be? Well, where do I want to go? Because I mean, I'm 20 or 30 or 40 now, but that's not who I'm going to want to be when I'm 50 or 60 or 70, or maybe even tomorrow. So that gives you the opportunity to grow into the person you want to be. And that's really the end goal for all of us, I think, is to be the best possible version of who we are.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said, and I couldn't agree more. And I wanted you to talk about this framework just because it's simple, it's relatable, and I believe it to be something that's easily memorable. Right? Recognize, redefine, replace, reinforce, revise. And I always say to my listeners, "Hey, you may not be able to write it this second, but n- don't just write the words that we said. Write what you felt when you heard these words, because that's how you can now connect the dots to actually making a change in your own life if you're looking to improve and grow, because that's what we want to do here. So, um, I want to ask one last question before we jump into our final four. Um, the if someone's listening, they're leading a team, but the external life is heavy. It's a lot going on. What would you say are three things that they could do this week to lead more with empathy without losing their head or losing their current standards? What kind of things would you say to them?
So the first thing would be the name their perspective. The more you can name the other person's perspective, and you can do that. That's cognitive empathy. You can do it quietly by yourself and just think about it. the more you're going to be able to align those outcomes. And the more you can align those outcomes, the more strategically you can get everybody on the same path. The second thing would be to remember to always lead with a cool head and a warm heart. You've got to use both kinds of empathy. You've got to have cognitive and emotional empathy, and with self empathy in there as well, which is why the third one would be to remain critical, not caring. If you're dealing with a lot of heavy stuff, if you're dealing with teams that maybe don't work so well together, if you've got a lot going on, it's okay to be critical. It's okay to look at things like a computer and crunch data and try to see a better way to do it. But try not to assign emotion as much as you can. Stay on the cognitive side of things so that it doesn't eat you alive and you don't become a statistic for leadership burnout.
They're so good. Those are so good. That last one. That one's that's you know, being critical, but then not taking it further mentally. That's a big piece. That's a big piece. All right, so we're gonna hop into our final four. These are questions that I am now asking every guest that comes on the show, and want to get your thoughts and opinions on it. So the first question is, what's a leadership myth about empathy or emotional intelligence that you want to kill for good right now on this platform?
And which one? That it's all about feeling and it makes you soft. It is not all about feeling and it does not make you soft.
Love that. Love that. Who is your favorite leader in history and why?
You know, I tend to go back to like the ancient Greeks and the Romans. I've been doing a lot of reading about the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius. And he wasn't necessarily a leader, but he did influence other leaders. And really that's what a leader is someone who influences other people. So just with the amount of information that he put out there and the way it has shaped leadership over the centuries, today he's my favorite. Tomorrow it could be somebody else.
Well, I actually have meditation sitting over to my right now, so I know exactly
Excellent.
what you mean. I read a passage every morning, so it's it's a staple in my life, 100%. It's great, great, great leader to pick. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, the next question: what's one piece of leadership advice that you received that changed the way that you lead currently?
To lead the way I would lead. Don't try to lead like Steve Jobs. Don't try to lead like Brene Brown. Don't try to lead like somebody else. The authenticity comes first. And your people will know that. Because if you're trying to pretend you're somebody that you're not, people smell that and it comes off as inauthentic and it doesn't work. So lead as yourself first.
Love that. Love that. And then the last one: how can our listeners begin to think like a leader today?
Name their outcome. Start your leadership by understanding where the other person is at, because then you don't have to drag them along behind you. They will follow you because you're leading in the same direction.
So good. That's so good. Dr. Melissa, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on to the show. I appreciate your work. I appreciate how you talk about this. It's not just the fluff that we hear sometimes on the internet. It's not just a quote post on LinkedIn. You talk about the depth of it. You talk about the practicality of it. And I appreciate that. And I'm sure our listeners do. To everybody listening, if you did get value from this, do something with it today, right? Don't just collect information. You know, we're not information collectors. Apply one thing, right? All of Melissa's links are going to be in the show notes if you want to reach out to her. If you want to have a conversation with her, I'm sure she's open to it. Just reach out, right? Um, as always, thank you for tuning in to Think Like a Leader. We'll see you next week. Dr. Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.